Hey everyone, welcome to another brand new episode of CPOV Autographs. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. And before we get into this week's episode, I did want to focus on the video game talk of this episode, which more on that in a minute, by talking about how I and two other members of the Certain Point of View podcast network, Frankie and Jeff, are going to be at PAX East 2022. I'm very excited to be at PAX East. And not only that, but on April 22nd, the Friday of PAX East, I, along with Jeff and Frankie, will be on a panel about the evolution of queer representation in gaming. I'm very excited. We have some incredible guests, Radiant G, Shell Wong, and Chris Compendio, all joining us for an incredible talk about how queerness in gaming has come a long way, but also has a really long way to go. So if you want to go to that panel, again, that's going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern on the 22nd of April. I will also be there the whole weekend from Thursday until Sunday. I will be going to other panels. I will be interviewing folks who make and are involved in the games industry. All of that stuff you're going to be able to find over on my gaming podcast, Fun and Games, which is also on the network. So more on that as we get closer to that weekend of April. But I just wanted to shout it out now. So if you were penciling in stuff for your Boston visit and PAX East, to put my panel on that list. Anyway, enough about that. My guest for this episode is the incredible Dr. Rachel Kowert. Rachel has an incredible YouTube channel called Psychgeist. She's been writing about psychology and video game related psychology stuff for a while. We talk about the psychology of Final Fantasy. We talk about Animal Crossing. We talk about how much she loves The Witcher and so much more. She was such an incredible guest. It was such a delight to finally chat with her after orbiting each other on Twitter for as long as we had. This is a great episode. I loved chatting with Rachel, and now I am going to shove off so y'all can listen to the episode itself instead of me talking about it. So without further ado, here's my incredible chat with the brilliant Dr. Rachel Kowert. I am so excited today to be talking with Dr. Rachel Kowert. I think I found you through Cipher of Tears community, I believe. Oh. Had shared some of your work. And I've been a loyal follower ever since. We often engage on things related to Final Fantasy online because there's a common love there. But I'm very excited to have you. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. And, good company, Cipher of Tear, Final Fantasy. I mean, we're already off to a great start.
And so you are a psychologist. You famously have a YouTube channel called Psychgeist, which you kind of, I love the actual log line of it, which is the psychology of the era, the science of games. And you take psychology and you apply it to gaming and talk about how certain things intertwine. You did a long form video on the psychology of Final Fantasy, which was great. I love when you talk about everyone's favorite heartthrob, Cloud, who is obviously the best.
Obviously.
So I guess to start, let's talk about a little bit about why Psychgeist, why YouTube, why talk about the psychology of gaming.
Yeah, it was, everyone needed a project when quarantine first hit. This was mine. I've long been on the soapbox of finding ways to disseminate information about games and the science of games to audiences that are not academic or scientific audiences. And I've done a few books that were targeted specifically for that purpose. But it's still, books, sometimes it's hard to get out there that people know that it exists. And I thought, you know what? It would be a great tool, YouTube. And it has been. And honestly, if I knew it was going to be such a good tool, I would have done it a long time ago, because so often people talk about violent video games, for instance, and I say the same things over and over. And now I just link them to a video, which is quite nice.
I love that. Yeah. And what I like also about Psychgeist is that you do a few different things. Like, it's not just video games even. Like, you have a great series called Reaction Time where you and a friend take on psychology in TV and movies and like that non-video game visual medium. And I've always been fascinated by that, right? Like, I always often try and ask, when talking to someone in a profession that is often portrayed in TV and movies, like medical professionals, construction workers, whoever, like, is it like what you see on TV? And I love how you get into it and discuss the things, the do's and don'ts, and like what you wouldn't have done if you were actually working with that client. Where did that idea for reaction time come from? Was it just your own frustration with how this stuff is portrayed?
Yeah, honestly. So we opened with the first season of In Treatment, which is kind of an old show from HBO. But when that show came on, I was studying to become a therapist. I was doing my master's. And I remember seeing it and being like, this is it. This is hitting that sweet spot of what therapy is actually like. And I always remembered that because all the other portrayals are just so terrible. I mean, like you said, I do a lot of episodes with Dr. Sarah Hayes, and the whole time we're just like, no, this is not it. So, when you learn too much, when you know too much, it becomes ruined, right? And so I thought I would just, ruin it for everyone else.
That's amazing. Is there at this point, because I haven't watched all the episodes yet, is there like the ultimate like bad version, like the worst culprit of this problem?
Yes, it came out this week. It is the show Gypsy. And it's, I had never seen it before. Dr. Sarah had seen it and she was like, you have to watch it. It's just so bad. And I've since seen there are many lists of like worst therapists ever. And Gypsy is always number one. So I guess they're the worst.
Amazing. So I guess let's talk a little bit about your history. So did you always want to be a therapist? Did you always want to work with psychology and talk about psychology?
I did. I wanted to be a therapist for as long as I can remember. And if you want to do anything in psychology as a profession, you have to have more than one degree. Like an undergraduate degree isn't going to cut it. So after I got my undergraduate, I knew I had to continue on. And I went to get my master's in counseling psychology to become a therapist. And literally on my first day, I knew I did not want to be a therapist. I went to class, they had some kind of demonstration, and I was like, no, don't want to do that. But I knew that doing the program and understanding the perspective of a clinician would make me better well suited for whatever it is I did want to do. So I did continue through the program, and it was through that I discovered my love for research. And then I went on to get a research-based PhD.
Amazing. I love that. It's funny because I think a lot of folks in the therapy becomes more and more broadly accepted, which is great. Everyone should be in therapy, literally every person on the planet. It's a good thing. But most people think that's just what psychologists do. That's the only thing they do, and there's like a lot of common misconceptions about psychology versus psychiatry and versus all of these different things. And so I think it's really interesting that you knew what part of it you didn't want to do and then made a beeline for the kind of things you wanted to do.
Yeah.
What are some of the common questions you get about psychology and video games, or people who want to know more about this branch of psychology?
There's some good staples. I can be at a conference talking about anything, and I always get one or two parents that come up to me and say, so my child plays Fortnite and I need to know. There's always that. I would say, addiction, violent video games, and games as being somehow antisocial. Those are the top three that I get time and time again.
Yeah, and it's funny because as a fellow person who plays video games, a lot of those feel such tired subjects to us, right? We know video games don't cause violence. We know that video games can actually be very social and very inclusive when they want to be. And so it must be frustrating as not only a person who does this field, but also who loves video games to get those kinds of questions. You must have the go-to answer for that stuff that you deliver every time.
I mean, I do answer those questions a lot. For sure, answer those questions a lot. And it does get kind of tiresome because a lot of times I want to talk about the positive side of gaming. There's a lot of positive impacts for social community and mental health and reducing loneliness and being playful. And there's lots of things to talk about that go beyond violent video game content. So that goes back to, I'm glad I created the YouTube channel, because I often at this point, I'm like, I could go into an 8-minute rant, or you can just go watch it on your own time.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a link. Go check it out.
Exactly.
Being this awesome personality and author would be enough, but you are also the research director of Take This. For those, I am very familiar with Take This. I am friends with the folks over at SDGC. I know a lot of them are Take This ambassadors. Talk a little bit about what Take This is and why it's important.
Take This is such a wonderful organization. I was a longtime fan before I started working there. We are a mental health nonprofit, the first mental health nonprofit to form serving the gaming industry and the gaming community. So we seek to destigmatize mental health challenges and provide mental health resources to the industry and community. My aspect of that is kind of like the research and advocacy branch. But yeah, we're most famous for our AFK rooms at PAX conferences, which are quiet staff spaces, so you can take a break from the hustle and bustle from the show floor. They are coming back. We will be at PAX East, which is very exciting. Yay! It's been quite a hiatus.
Oh my God, yeah. Like, I'm so excited for PAX East just because it's like I'm, of course, I am tenuously excited, right? Because pandemic's still happening and we should be masked and vaxxed, but like, it'll be so nice to see other people again and like be able to engage in that part of the industry again.
I can't even. I will be at PAX East.
So will I. Excellent.
Yeah, we're going to have to meet and have a drink and
I would
kibitz.
love that. Yeah,
I would love it too. It's very exciting to think that we get to be around our people again. It's great.
And what I love about Take This also is that like, and there are other podcasts and other shows now that are starting to talk about this, but like mental health and video games seems like like they must go together. To me, a person who suffers from depression and anxiety and often plays video games to relieve those things. But I feel like for the broader community and the broader world, it's not that obvious. Have you seen that also out in the world?
Yeah, it's not, which is why we're saying, I guess, so tired of talking about addiction. It's like, let's instead talk about social community. It's not a natural relationship that people see. But if you look in the research, if you're in the field, and like you said, if you kind of snoop around a bit on Google, you'll see, there's a lot of positive mental health benefits to being playful, to being social, and to having an escape. And a lot of times people say escape is a negative thing, which I find kind of odd, only in video games, because escaping into a good book, we all know, is like the preferred mode of escapism.
Right.
But the mental health benefits and the, psychological experiences of escaping into, Hyrule is very positive and can have a lot of positive interpersonal benefits.
I agree. Let's shift the conversation a little bit to your video game development, since I know you're a big gamer. When was the earliest you played video games? Do you remember your first game and your first console?
Oh, I remember Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, the Nintendo. My uncle bought it for us, which was very cool. I must have been, 6 or 7. So I do remember very clearly getting a Nintendo and being super psyched about it.
Amazing. Yeah, Super Mario Brothers, I feel like I'm getting the sense we're around the same age, because for me also, it's like my brother got a Nintendo before me, and then I whined and complained, and I eventually got my own because he wouldn't let me play his. And mine came with the Super Mario Brothers Dunk Hut combo cartridge with the light gun and everything. Do you have a favorite, like a standout favorite video game of all time?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My favorite of all time is Final Fantasy VI. I'll die on that hill. I love that game. But last week I had the very fortunate opportunity to be in a Zoom call with Tim Schafer, who was a legend. Yes. And I got to express my love for Day of the Tentacle, which was kind of an out of body experience, because Day of the Tentacle, I think, was actually when my love for games was sparked. Mm-hmm. There were female characters, there was humor, it was colorful, it was silly, it was adventurous, it was a role playing, it was perfection. And I can really honestly pinpoint that moment of experiencing that game as being like, yes, I love this. Whatever this is, I love it. And I want to keep doing it.
Yeah, I feel like we all, as people who play video games, as hobbyists, but also as like a passion, have that moment of like games. Like, there are two for me. The first time I realized that video games were more than just completing a level was when I first played Chrono Trigger. The only game that I think is better than Final Fantasy VI, but we can have that argument later.
I'll say it's on par. Okay. I love Chrono Trigger.
Me too. And so like I got a Steam Deck a few days ago, and the first thing I did was install the Steam version of Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
And that was my first one where I realized, you can tell complex stories, and like it's the first time a game made me cry and all of that. And then it wasn't until I played Mass Effect on the Xbox 360 that and now since have my own Mass Effect podcast because I'm a, obsessive. I realized, not only can you tell stories, but you can tell developing friendships and romance, developing relationships. Like we talk about, like on my podcast, Reignite, the check-ins that you would do with the members of the Normandy crew. Like that's such a social thing that I just never thought about in games before. Whereas now, even though I'd played RPGs for years, now I always go back and check in with everyone after every mission in any game. Because I'm like, maybe something new's happened. Maybe they like me better. Like, you never know. And I love those moments. Do you find that you are drawn more towards narrative games like Final Fantasy that give you that kind of connection and relationship development?
Oh, absolutely. And you talk about the check-ins. The thing for Final Fantasy VI for me was really the friendships between men and women that were strictly platonic friendships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was like, preach that we can have these and they don't have to be romantic. I'm absolutely drawn to narrative games. The thing is now, though, I have 3 small children, so I don't play them so much because I have no time. Now I'm like strictly an Animal Crossing kind of gal. But I love narrative RPGs. Those are absolutely my jam.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned Animal Crossing because I feel like that's such a unique game in a sea of games. I mean, games like it have existed, like The Sims and others, for a while, but Animal Crossing is one of those games that I just associate with relaxation in a way that I don't even associate with games I like better than it. And I think it's about the day-to-day living, the developing relationships with your neighbors, things like that. The fact that it's on the Switch now, so it's on the go. All of those things. I would imagine, since you're a Final Fantasy fan, violence in video games, it's not that you prefer that to others, but it's more the bigger picture. But do you also seek out games like Animal Crossing often that are like just relaxing, chill games that are not about shooting or stabbing someone?
Oh, yeah. Give me a farming simulator,
Ooh.
some Stardew, some Harvest Moon,
Nice.
do a deep cut. I absolutely. And Animal Crossing is great because it was really the first game I could play with my kids, like actually play. And we have, our island together, and my oldest is 7, so she can actually do things and build things. So it's going to be a little special place in my heart for that also. But I remember playing the OG on the GameCube and liking it then. So when it came out, like right when the pandemic hit, I feel like it was just like right place, right time. So yeah, love some Animal Crossing. And like you mentioned, it's the perfect mix of socializing with your neighbors, of relaxing farming simulator. You have your plants, and then you have turnips, right? So then there's like some excitement with the turnip selling. So it's got something for everyone, I would say. And yeah, you don't have to grind. Like the only games I don't like are the games that have real time pressure. And some people like them, like Grand Theft Auto. My husband loves Grand Theft Auto. I will watch him play all day. If I have more than 2 stars, that's it. I'm done. I'm like, take the controller. I can't handle the stress of these police chasing me around. But other than that, I'll give it a go.
I mean, it's funny you bring up stress in games, especially when we're recording this. Elden Ring is on its high horse, if you will, I guess, of being this gigantic game. And From Software has made a ton of gigantic games, but nothing that has permeated the culture like Elden Ring. And I'm someone who I'm not always very good at difficult video games. I never really dove into them because of the lack of accessibility, but right before Elden Ring came out, I was like, I own Dark Souls 3. I know there's some mods to like reduce the damage you take, so it makes it a little more manageable. I'll give it a shot. Ended up beating it and loving it. And like, I found this line between the stress of and fear of screwing up and then failing and starting again. It's what and I didn't realize it was so similar to like games like Metroid, which I've loved my whole life. Like this idea of these bosses have patterns. You're going to be anxious the first time you walk in that room, but it makes death a function of the game instead of this thing that means you failed. And I think that's really fascinating. This idea like that you can use stress and pressure to get better at a thing. Now, of course, if you don't want to be stressed out playing one of those games, you shouldn't play one. But I think that it's really interesting to reframe that sometimes stress and anxiety from a game, if you want to engage in it, can be good. It can motivate you to kind of like beat the next thing or accomplish the next task.
Yeah. And that's a great analogy to life, my friend. There's a game, Video Games and Wellbeing, that I edited and I published a couple years ago. And it was the first book that focused on actually just positive impacts of games. And one of them is that exactly the lessons that we learn in games like that persistence through failure can translate into other areas of our lives. So like you just very beautifully explained, when you go into a room and have to give a presentation in front of your entire college class, you're going to be nervous and maybe you won't do so great, but you do it again, you get better. Eventually you figure out that you can, that you can do this.
Let's talk a little bit about video games and well-being, because I think I think it's really key in the growth of this industry that's still in its infancy compared to other media, still very much thought to be just for kids, and that, it's very immature. And so, like, talk a little bit about editing that and seeing that out in the world. It must be really great to see that kind of work gaining traction and being able to be purchased by people who want to know more about gaming.
Yeah, it's really great to have a book that is just on the positive. So the Video Game Debate was the first book that I edited back in 2015. And it was about the common debates in and around games. So it was like addiction, violence, social inadequacy, like all of those common things. And then I did the Video Game Debate 2. And that was again about like mobile games and loot boxes and gambling. And it's just like I mentioned to you, there's so much positive stuff. Like, wouldn't it be great to just not have to have the discussions about violence and addiction? Like we have them in other books, but let's just celebrate the life skills that we can learn from persisting through failure or from experiencing loss, in a video game, and how those emotions and those experiences can translate into how we process grief and loss in other areas of our lives in a real world. I'm using air quotes. You guys can't see me, but in a real world. So yeah, it was really great to have the opportunity to create a book that just, celebrated the positive. There's so much.
I mean, it's not like you're saying that gaming and their communities can be particularly negative online. That never happens, especially on Twitter all the time.
Oh dear. I'm talking at GDC in 2 weeks, and it is specifically about the potential negative things that can come. So yeah, it's not all good. It's not all bad, but it most certainly is some good. And we need to pay attention to that too.
I agree. I have a video game podcast that I will at some point have you on as well, just because I think you're so well, I mean, you're an awesome human, and that's just good enough. But also because to talk about this kind of stuff. But the main show is just me and a co-host kind of talking about things within the industry and types of games, genres, having guests, whatever. But about a year or two ago, I was so frustrated with the negativity online about games. I think it was around the time that the new Paper Mario came out, and there was like a screenshot, and people were like, "This game's gonna suck," and I was like, "From a screenshot? Really? Already?" I launched this series called Psychgeist within Fun and Games' feed. It's just a different host every episode talking for 5 to 15 minutes about a game they love and why they love it. No judgment. People can comment online, I guess, but it's just the host talking to the microphone. Like, I love this game. Here's why I love it. And I've gotten stories of people just talking about how they got certain games, when they discovered them. I had John Phipps on talking about why Final Fantasy VI practically saved his life, helped him develop. And so, one of the internet's most famous Final Fantasy VI fans. And so I love this attitude because I think it's so important to champion both, but also focus on the positives and celebrate the good. There's so many outlets that just want to bash or make fun of the problems. And I think while there's a space for that, of course, like anything else, celebrating positivity is so important. It's so easy to get caught up in the negative, but it's so much harder to focus on the good. And it's like people making fun of us we take to heart more than people complimenting us, right? Like a compliment rolls off, but negative stuff sticks with you for 3 weeks, that kind of thing. Do you find within gaming that that's your kind of goal, is to try and look at the more positive side?
I mean, it's interesting. So when I started to get into game research, like I said, I was doing my master's, and I was seeing a lot of parents concerned about the negative impact of World of Warcraft. Yeah. And I've told this story before, but I was playing loads of World of Warcraft at the time, right? So I started getting concerned genuinely about myself, because I was like, all these people seem worried. But there was no research at the time. So when I went into this field, I looked at the social impact of online gaming. That was my PhD thesis. And I 100% expected to find negative impacts based on the conversations that were happening around me. And that just wasn't the case.
Right.
There weren't any long-term social differences. Gamers are not the antisocial stereotype. So I've always kind of just been follow the data. I don't really have an agenda necessarily to tout positive or negative, but it's what does the research say? What does the science say? When we talk about addiction, we talk about violence, the common discussions around it do not reflect what we know in the scientific community. And I was doing an interview for a news outlet a few weeks ago, and we were doing the pre-interview, and it was about addiction, and I was saying like, well, there's not really evidence to suggest that games are addictive, blah blah blah. And the person interviewing made me some kind of snide offhand comment, and they were like, well, of course you don't think there's anything bad because you think games are great and wonderful. And I stopped and I was like, actually, I am just telling you what the research says, sir. Like, it's more positive than negative. It's at the very least neutral. I don't have an opinion, I think is what I actually told him. I was like, I'm just telling you what the facts say, because a lot of people just have a preconceived notion. And if you come in with anything that refutes that by saying the effects of games are more positive than negative, which from a scientific perspective, that is what the research does support. They think that you are trying to push a specific agenda. And I just want, scientific information to trickle out to the masses. I just want people to be informed based on research instead of moral panic, which is often what fuels these discussions.
Yeah, unfortunately, something we've learned over the course of the pandemic is that people don't necessarily want to be educated on literally anything and want to be ignorant and listen to people who don't know what they're talking about. And so I'm glad that you are out there pushing the research and the data forward, because I think that's key, especially when it comes to a medium as young as gaming is. I mean, with every passing day, it gets broader and more people get involved. And like, I'm a big advocate for, like, the term gamer is dumb, right? We don't call a reader a booker. We don't call a movie watcher a movieer, right? Like, I appreciate why we have the term gamer, but I think, like, I'm a big advocate for anybody can play games. Small child, grown up, elderly person, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what games you play either. I think, I'm curious if in your research you've seen, I mean, I know there are age ranges, but have you seen a surprising amount of data that points to people you might not think play games from a certain age group or a certain community?
Yeah, I have a fun anecdote for you. I have a colleague who was giving a talk at the American Psychiatric Association meeting, which is staunch psychologists, typically a pretty conservative organization. And he was talking about mobile games, and he was like, who here is a gamer? And like, literally nobody raised their hand. And he was like, who plays Candy Crush on their phone? And like 95% of the people in the room raised their hand. So I think it speaks to your point. Everybody plays games. Games are forever. My mom plays games all the time, crossword games and Wordle. Oh my gosh, sure. Everybody's playing Wordle. So yeah, games are absolutely for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's, I mean, look, it's the straight white men who gatekeep a lot of this stuff. And so, like, I think it's just that perspective that we're pushing past now. We're starting to see queerer games, games with more people of color, games led by more women. Like, if I don't have a game led by another straight white dude ever again, I think I'd be a very happy person. And there are plenty of straight white dudes I love in games. I'm a Nathan Drake fan. But I think it's time that the industry more reflect what its community looks like. But then again, I mean, if you think about movies still aren't there yet, right? They're getting better, but like, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we expand that knowledge, how we get these things to be more diverse. How do we understand what we need to get to that place?
Yeah, media is generally not very diverse. Gina Davis did that Netflix special about film and how even just like women representation, female representation in film is like vastly, let alone women of color, as compared to the just heterosexual white male. How do we get there? We get there by diversifying who's working in the industry. And it's not just about having one person at the table who represents a different viewpoint. There's research that points to it has to be 30% of the room or the person in power. You can't ask anyone to be the only LGBTQ person at the table and think that that counts as representation. That voice is not going to be heard. So the more we can diversify the industry, which I do think is trending in that direction, I do think there have been initiatives in that direction to support that. It is not there yet. There is a long way to go, but at least these discussions are being had. But speaking of media representation, this is just fresh on my mind because I've been doing a lot of research looking at children's literature books because I have lots of kids. You're 3 times as likely to have a speaking animal in the central of a children's story than a child from a minority background. 3 times.
That's wild. That's crazy.
I mean, and what's more traditional than books?
That's crazy. Well, yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because as of when we're recording, though it'll be a little while after that this is released, if people were watching your YouTube channel, they might have seen a teaser trailer that was released for something.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to talk a little bit about what that might be and what we can expect from that.
Yeah. So, when I'm not doing video game stuff, I have lots of children. I have 3 children. And a few years ago, I went to a garage sale and bought a bunch of children's books from a retiring teacher. And I was reading them all to my daughter. And I was getting very frustrated with the lack of female characters that were the center of the story. And if they were the center of the story, they had to have superpowers for some reason. They couldn't just be normal kids. So in 2019, I kickstarted a collection of stories that centered on female characters doing everyday things, just everyday girls, everyday situations, the power of just being a kind person to your friends kind of situation.
Sure.
And it was really great. And I raised $26,000 in 30 days and it was awesome. And then since then, I've gone on to write 3 new stories of this universe. We're calling it Tales from Cloud Canyon, and it'll be kickstarted in June. So for 3 new additional stories to this universe that have male and female characters, and the first non-binary they them character, which is very exciting. So watch this space for that.
That's awesome. I'll include a link to the trailer in the show notes. Talk a little bit about the children's book side of it, right? Because I remember when you kickstarted that collection of stories, I love that it's just born out of being a parent, right? And that we live in a culture, in a society where we have so much access to stuff, right? Like I've been podcasting for almost a decade, but it started with me talking into an iPad microphone with 2 of my friends. Like we just, technology is so accessible, and the ability to create and write and start something is so accessible. So talk a little bit about that journey of wanting to create stories that you wanted to see in the world and how that process went.
Yeah, it's funny. So I was really frustrated with these stories, and I have a friend who runs a small press in the UK, and I reached out to her and I was like, you need to publish some books with like girls in the stories. This is so frustrating. And she was like, well, why don't you write them? And I was like, I can't write them. Like I write science books. This is ridiculous. Don't be silly, Lizzie. But she was like, give it a go. And it just like bore out of me. I don't really know how. And I wrote these 26 stories in a very short amount of time. And then it's like, what do I do with them? Like, I don't know anyone in publishing except for my colleague who doesn't do kids books. And it's a really quite a high mountain to climb, children's book publishing, if you're not like in the know. But Kickstarter is for everyone. So I did a lot of research trying to figure out how to do a Kickstarter. A Kickstarter is not for the faint of heart. I can't actually believe I'm doing another one because they're very stressful and there are loads of work. But I was very passionate about people seeing themselves reflected in the books. More than half my characters come from minority background. More than 10% of my characters have visible disabilities. Like this stuff doesn't exist in children's books, and I don't really understand why.
Yeah.
And everyone, like I say in the teaser trailer, everyone deserves to be the hero of their own story. And I adamantly believe that. So I'm just gonna, stress and sweat on Kickstarter until it's funded and hope for the best.
Well, yeah, but I think we're starting to see it more, right? And like most recently, like this is fresh in my mind because I just watched Turning Red. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet. I think that your kids will probably love it. There was a lot of complaints online like, oh, this is not an identifiable story. It's the lead character is Asian and, it's all girls. Like what's to like? And it's such BS because I identified with a ton of it. And it's people want to identify just based on what the person looks like, and that's dumb. That's a very white person perspective, I feel like. When you can identify in the little moments, like hell, even for me growing up as a queer kid who didn't necessarily know how queer he was, loving boy bands. And there's a boy band featured in the show, and these girls wanting to see this boy band so badly. A thing I never did because I didn't publicly talk about how much I loved these pop groups. Not as much as I do now anyway. And so like, I think you're absolutely right. Like, taking in the media that exists and wanting to, like, I as a white person could be perfectly happy never seeing myself in media again. There are plenty of other stories to tell, and there are things to relate to besides what the person looks like for us. But I don't think that's necessarily true for everyone else because they've not even been represented enough.
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, I had Berenstain Bear. Do I relate to a bear? No, I relate to the stories and the sibling rivalries between the brother and the sister mostly. But you're absolutely right. If you never see yourself, it's like we were big into Encanto in my house right now. Encanto, day and night. Actually, very much love Encanto. I'm here for it. But I've seen a lot of stuff online about the character Louisa and how the creators were very adamant about making a strong female and how they very much tried the other people, the investors, I guess, to have her like skinnier and prettier and more classically feminine. And they were like, no, we're sticking to it. And they made all these Isabella dolls, like she's like the pretty one, and everyone wants Louisa merch, and they did not expect that. And the movie comes out and was like, we like her, the strong one. It's like people want to see themselves represented if they've never seen it. Have you ever seen a Disney character that wasn't just like a 20-inch waist and big doe eyes? Like it hasn't existed. So I am so here for this different representation in these movies, especially for kids. Especially for kids.
Yeah, I think, like, look, Disney is not a perfect company. In fact, they are far from it. But I think they are giving Pixar and the studio house on the whole more freedom to do stuff like that. I think they're also bringing in creators like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's done a ton for them, to tell those kind of diverse stories. Like Moana was a movie that it's not that I didn't want to see it. I just knew nothing about it, and then was absolutely floored by it, like absolutely blown away. And I mean, I'll watch anything The Rock does because I love The Rock. But like, it's so nice to see. Also learn things like about these cultures through these movies, you know, because they try and make them as accurate as possible while still making it a fantasy or supernatural or whatever else. And like, I definitely don't know a lot about everything or anything. And so like learning and letting kids be able to learn that way too, I think is great.
Oh, it's amazing. And, you know, on the Encanto train, I've watched all the behind the scenes stuff. Like they went to Colombia and they, you know, listened to what the music was like that came from Colombia, and they got only Colombian actors. And like, it is really cool because you're getting a glimpse into a culture, that you know nothing about, that's been done very authentically. And it's just, I love the direction. And I know Disney's not perfect, but they are definitely going in a direction that I appreciate.
Yes, for sure. And it does seem like other places are starting to try and follow. I just feel like it could be faster, just like anything else. But, you know, I mean, that's just what it is. Give it to me
now.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, it's at a point now, though, that I'm more aware of this stuff, too. And it's like I start asking, like, well, this being able to create a character that's male or female is great, but maybe let's not tie gender to the presentation. Maybe don't have to pick a gender. They could not gender, just design how you want them to look. And like going back and playing older games and seeing that binary for me also just stands out so much more. Like I love the Mass Effect franchise. I love the trilogy. It's some of my favorite games, but with having to create femme or male Shep, it's like, okay, you could have just as easily just had Shep and designed how they looked, picked their, like how their body looked. Like it's just, you know, and we'll get there. I just feel like I would rather we get there faster.
Yeah, we always want things faster. It's also an artifact of its time, right? Like
yeah.
We were talking about that show Reaction Time that I do on my YouTube channel earlier, and we did Frasier. I recorded some episodes about Frasier recently, and we did it with Dr. V and we did it with Sarah. And Dr. V and I are so nostalgic about Frasier,
sure,
but we hadn't seen it in a while, and it's definitely an artifact of its time. There are some things that I'm going to say don't age well, like jokes at the expense of trans people, for instance. Those are in there. So yeah, like male and female Shep, maybe in the next iteration, we will see more fluidity there.
Yeah. I feel like as these industries grow and more people, like you said, more people who represent those kinds of people are in those positions of power, it makes it easier because they can make those pushes. When everyone at the top are stuffy white men, it's much harder to make those changes as they think they know best.
It's impossible because also it's their perspective. That's why it's so important to have, 30% of the room with the person in power to be of a different perspective, because you shouldn't be telling other people's stories. You should only be telling your story. But if everyone's story is a Caucasian male story, then yeah, it's a bit boring. It's a bit dull. Move on.
Yeah. Talking about the YouTube channel and the kinds of different things you've done, episodes on the gamer girl, you've done episodes on toxicity in games and gaming culture. How do you decide on a topic? What brings you to these topics? Obviously, the psychology of Final Fantasy is pretty easy to track within who you are. But these other topics, is it just what's being talked about at the time? Is it something you're passionate about? Like, how do you get the idea for those videos?
Yeah, great question. I mapped out the first year of content creation. I mapped out the year completely. And I just started with, what are the main questions I'm getting? Addiction, aggression, social impact. Okay, these are like the big heavy hitters. The gamer girl one actually came up because, do you remember, it was like the video game with the live action footage called Girl Gamer. Yeah. So when that came out and was like going around the internet, that's when I like halted everything and focused in on making it a gamer girl video. So sometimes it is topical. The metaverse. I did one on the metaverse recently. That was obviously topical because I've done more interviews about the metaverse than I've done about my actual area of expertise, that I thought, I guess I should make a video about the metaverse because everyone's talking about it. So it's mostly mapped out ahead of time. By content production, schedule has significantly slowed because my research production has increased, which is a great thing. But I still, have lists of kind of hot topics or things that people often ask me about. I want to make one for parents, like, hey, parents, here are some things that you could do to get engaged with games and that sort of thing. So there's still some ideas mulling, but usually it's what is of the time that's irritating me, or what's a question I get like ad nauseum.
I'm just going to comment for those who are listening, obviously can't see it. You have an excellent collection of stuff behind you. You have the Super Mario Brothers Lego set. You have an actual painting of Cave Johnson behind you. I want a giant Cave Johnson painting, but I think my spouse would kill me. Although she does enjoy Portal, so maybe I can get away with it. Are you a collector? Do you like collecting things from games?
Yeah, I do. I do, but I have to like rein it in. So like, for instance, Funko Pops, right? You could go really wild. I bought one because I went to the Funko Pop like facility where they make them, and I bought Hopper from Stranger Things. That's what I decided on from the store. And then my sister-in-law bought me a Mad Eye Moody, and then I had to get a Geralt. Had to get a Geralt. Yeah, no, I love The Witcher. Hashtag Cavill influencer. We haven't talked about that yet, but I'm sure we will. So yeah, it's easy to collect, but I have to, it's a very curated background. I will say though, very recently I was like, there's not enough Grogu. So I did make room for a Grogu Lego because I felt like that was a need. But yeah, I got to rein it in. I only have so much space.
I love that. Yeah, you can't see it. It's off camera over here, but I have Amiibo and Funko Pops.
Yeah,
and
it's
like
hard with the Funko. They have everything.
I get so obsessed. Like I have one of Ron Swanson, one of my favorite TV characters. So like, yeah, it is something that I've tried to rein in, and thankfully my spouse supports me now, and she often will buy me ones if I want, like certain, like if I have them on my Hanukkah list or whatever else. And so, but yeah, I couldn't help but notice the Cave Johnson painting because I love J.K. Simmons in just about all of his roles, but there's something about the unhinged nature of Cave Johnson, especially in the latter part of that game, that was just like one of my favorite things in video games.
A scientist in a video game, first of all, count me in. The fun thing about the Cave Johnson painting is, well, two things are funny about it. One, I have this very curated background, right? And everyone notices Cave Johnson. It is the one thing that always gets a comment, like first thing, like, oh, that's Cave Johnson, which I think is funny, like of all the things you can comment on. The second thing is it's actually a voice activated picture that you can put batteries in, and when you walk by, he says snarky things to you.
Nice.
Even better, Cave Johnson.
So let's talk a little bit about your love of video games. I know you said you're playing less stuff. Is there stuff coming out that you're looking forward to eventually playing, or things that you've seen recently that you're like, when I have time, that's at the top of my list?
Witcher 3 is at the top of my list right now. I was very excited to play it, and I was like, I'm gonna make time to do it. And then I was very sad because I have a Mac and not a PC, so I can't play it. I would love to play Witcher 3. I also am a Final Fantasy gal. I've played every Final Fantasy up into 15. That's when I started having children. I have Final Fantasy 15 in the cellophane. I know it's a good game. Everyone tells me how good it is. It's like a boy band one right up my alley. I would love to play that. Or Breath of the Wild, which I haven't yet played.
No.
I know that's bad. That's bad for my street cred. But my kids are 7, 4, and under a year. So please forgive me for not doing that.
I mean, at least Breath of the Wild is a portable game that you can put in your Switch. So maybe eventually you'll find a few minutes here and there. I have a friend of mine who's a content creator who often posts on Twitter that he's like still playing. It's been years and years and years since he got a Switch first. He got a Switch late, but he's also still playing Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's also one of those games like Elden Ring now that you could play forever. Like there's so much stuff to discover in that. And so I feel like a sense of discovery is important to video games. Do you find that you are drawn more to games where you can explore and like see things and find your own adventure?
Yeah, it's like the digital version of the choose your own adventure books as a kid. I love that. I think that's probably why I played so much World of Warcraft, as I mentioned back in the day. I just love this idea of an open world. I love the idea of all the different terrains. I like the lore of the different like races and groups. I really, the 100-hour games of an open space, give it to me. Someone told me the other day, I have the best game for you. You should play. I was like, what is it? Elden Ring. I was like, yeah, I'm sure I would love it, but I also have, no time for that. But definitely, I think you too, it sounds like as well, you like exploring.
I do. Yeah, I think that it's something that as a kid manifested in my love of Metroidvanias. Like for the longest time, Super Metroid and then Metroid Fusion when it came out on the Game Boy Advance were among my favorite games of all time. And then as I mentioned Chrono Trigger earlier, like that back half of the game where, I guess spoilers for a very old Super Nintendo game, when you lose your main character of the game, when Chrono dies and you can choose to bring him back or not, you can have the party in any order. You can go to all these different places. Like the game opens up in the same way in your favorite game, in the back half of 6, like once the world is destroyed, quote unquote. Again, I guess spoilers for a very old game that just got remastered. Like you can go anywhere. It doesn't even tell you how to find everybody. You could beat the game without like finding every character. And so, yeah, I'm totally on board with that. I think that why I love The Witcher specifically is there's something about Geralt and his charisma, and like whether it's Henry Cavill in the TV show or Doug Cockle in the video game version, there's something about this character who's just kind of brash and brusque and sarcastic, and being able to explore these great giant worlds. You know, it's overwhelming. I only finished Witcher 3 because so I watched season 1 with my spouse by myself. We watched season 2 together, but I watched season 1 of Witcher by myself, having only played a little bit of the third game. And then as soon as I finished season 1, I went, well, now I need to play the games. I bought Witcher 1 and 2, hated the first game, skipped it, loved Witcher 2, and then when I got back to Witcher 3, I was like, all right, I played 80 hours of this game and never finished it. This time, no side quests. We're going to beeline for the main story, and I ended up finishing it. Talk a little bit about your love of The Witcher. So I'm guessing a lot of it is generated from the TV show on Netflix.
It is. I will say, though, we have a PlayStation. My husband did play The Witcher 3 on the PlayStation, and I am forever player too. I actually very much enjoy vicariously watching other people play games. So I had some experience with The Witcher from watching him play the unicorn scene in particular. Who can forget? And then the TV show came on, and it was one of those things, honestly, where people were like, you should watch it, you should watch it, you should watch it. And I was like, I don't got time. And then you should watch it, you should watch it. And then finally one day I was like, forget it. I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to watch it. And I was like sucked in, like, that old movie with John Ritter when they're sucked into the satellite dish? I forget what it's called. I feel like it was that kind of moment. And I was just so immersed in this world and this lore. And I like that kind of stuff anyway. And Henry Cavill obviously is a perfect Geralt. Like just it's one of those moments where it's they're acting, but it's like it's almost a disbelief. Like you just feel like you're watching these things play out. So yeah, I just fell in love completely with The Witcher. And then I made an offhand comment once in one interview about escapism and how I escape into Final Fantasy VII remake and people think there's something wrong with you, but I escape into The Witcher with Henry Cavill and people endorse it. And I kind of just became a thing with me, like making that example. And then people came to expect it. And then I tried to see if I could sneak it into interviews, and I got it on like Live French TV, and I got in like all these different interviews, like these references to The Witcher. So now it's my thing. And I'm a proud, Henry Cavill influencer. I've influenced at least 2 or 3 people to play and or watch The Witcher. So I feel like my job here is done.
Yeah, you're doing good work. Yeah, I mean, well, I think like I've always loved Henry Cavill. I think he's been great in a ton of stuff. I think he was the only good thing about the Superman movies he was in. I think he was a good Superman. But like the funny thing about listening to him talk in interviews about The Witcher is that he's a through and through nerdy nerd, D&D, Warhammer. He loved the novels and the video games of The Witcher and like replays them constantly in a way. And like a while back, he was involved in something related to Mass Effect. Like there was people zoomed in on a script and they don't know what it is. Like he is a video game obsessive. There was the very viral video of him building a PC that is too hot for the internet, which no one expected.
One of us.
Right. But like, it's so cool to get to see more and more these mainstream, like when I found out Vin Diesel is a big D&D player and like runs tables. Also, like all of these actors now being very public about, oh yeah, I'm a nerd and I love these nerdy things is really cool. There was a Warhammer event not that long ago, and apparently Henry Cavill was just walking around taking photos with folks. I never saw him post anything, but like all of these other people posted photos with him, and he seems like a lovely person. It's so nice. Like growing up, if I wore a nerdy t-shirt, I was very likely to get beat up in high school. Now, I mean, that can still happen, but it's so much more mainstream to be nerdy in a way that I'm a little jealous of as an adult.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. It's like you said, I've always been nerdy, and to see people who are Superman being nerdy is, it's next level, and he is, I think that if we knew him, if you and I knew him, like in our social circle, he would be, one of us. Like that's, right. I think what makes him so endearing. And we know that he fought so hard to be Geralt because he played the games and because he loved the books. And it's not just, another gig, like it's in his heart and his soul. So yes, nerd love.
And like, on the other hand, I don't think it's a requirement to be that deep in the source material to get a role. If you're a good actor, you're a good actor, right? But
definitely,
I think that there's something unmistakable about someone like Henry Cavill taking on Geralt because of how close he is to the source material. And I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. It's funny. I saw, since I'm an influencer, I had to do some of my research, right? Right. I saw an interview where they were saying like the producers were like annoyed, like they didn't want to hire him because he wanted the role so bad, but they had to bring him in for a read or whatever. And they were like, damn it, like he's just too good. Like we have to take him for this role.
Before we wrap up, a question I've been asking a lot of my guests lately is, so we are still living in a global pandemic. It is not over yet, folks. Please get vaccinated if you can, get boosted if you can, wear a mask. But as we hopefully are getting towards the tail end of this, which I'm very hopeful for, I started asking during the pandemic, it's very easy to get bogged down in the terrible stuff that's happening. We've all, on many levels, have gone through great difficulty during the pandemic. But I like to focus on the good when I can. Is there something really good that you can think of that came out of the pandemic? Something that might not have happened if the pandemic hadn't happened? A silver lining, if you will.
Oh man, I know the answer I want to say, and I know the answer maybe I should say.
You could say both.
I'll say both. The answer I want to say initially is I had a baby, a third baby in the pandemic, and that probably wouldn't have happened if not for the pandemic. But also, I think my YouTube channel came out of the pandemic, and that's been a really great resource, like I said, for outreach and advocacy to people who don't normally engage with scientific information. It's a real challenge, genuinely, to convey scientific information in a way that's understandable and relatable. And YouTube is such a good medium for that. And if I've helped inform at least one parent to better understand like why their child is playing so much Minecraft during COVID and help them understand it's not a bad thing and really it's best case scenario, then, that's a win. That's a win for me.
I love that. Yeah, I think being able to find an outlet. Also, I think everyone needs a creative outlet, whoever you are. It doesn't have to be something that you release online for other people to consume. It can just be something you do or make, I think. And I think video games has become that for a lot of people, to kind of wrap back up with kind of a thesis and see what you think of this. Like, I equated my multiple playthroughs of Mass Effect to fan fiction, right? This idea of I'm taking an established character from something and then telling a story I want to tell using the pieces, right? Which is where a lot of fan fiction starts. Like, do you think that video games are key to this like exploration of creativity and self-expression, especially nowadays?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's why Animal Crossing specifically, I think, helped change the game in terms of the way that we see games and the way that people are using games. And I think it called a lot of people to games that weren't necessarily in it before. I mean, absolutely. Games have always been great tools for exploration, identity exploration, social exploration. But when you are, I want to say stuck at home, if you're lucky enough to work from home, that is absolutely a privilege. My husband and I both were able to work from home. I also had my kids home, though, because I was pregnant and couldn't have them at school. So that was fun. If by fun, you mean not so fun. So I think that games have been, I've called them the saving grace of COVID-19, and I think I'll stand by that. A lot of people, like you said, creative outlets are good for everyone, and you may not realize what place Animal Crossing, whatever, what place games are holding for you, but they are absolutely spaces for creativity and stress relief and mood management and escape and social connection. Even if you're playing alone, you have the social relationships with the characters in the game. I think that if we can start thinking about games as tools for positive change, tools for our own mental well-being, we'll all be a little better off than just always talking about them as violence and addiction and all that stuff.
Very well said. Before we go, I would love for you to take a moment to tell folks where they can find you online, where they can find all of your work online, where they can go buy all of your awesome books that you edited. Please give your plugs.
Yes, I live on Twitter, Dr.
Same.
Kowert, right? You can find me on YouTube at Psychgeist. You can learn more about Take This at takethis.org. And yeah. Oh, and I have a website, rkowert.com, rkowert.com, if you want to learn more about my books and things.
Awesome. Please go check all that stuff. I will include links in the show notes. Thank you again so much for taking the time to chat with me. This was wonderful. We'd been in each other's orbit on Twitter for so long. I'm glad we finally got to have a conversation. The last thing I'll ask you to do is we have a saying on the show. It's born out of my now on indefinite hiatus music program because I won't ever admit that podcast is dead. And the saying is music is life and life is good. It's this idea that no matter how hard life gets, as long as you're creating, searching through your creativity, life won't be that bad. You'll find things, find joy. So if you could say music is life and life is good, we'll wrap up the show.
Music is life and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.nat.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, aka Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.